Mm-hmm. That way I can get chat up. If it wants to connect. Cool. Now I'm connected. Yeah, just gonna wait another minute or two for people to come in. I tweeted it out. If you don't follow my Twitter, it is Dirkification. Like the process of turning into Dirk. Like bimboification, but with Dirk. It's where I talk about shit. I have other Twitters. I have like 1,000. That's kind of probably my biggest one where I talk about most shit. Yeah, but I think most of you who see that follow my Twitter. I don't know. Maybe I have some YouTube subscribers who don't know me on Twitter. That'd be wild. I think I have some Twitch subscribers that don't follow my Twitter. It's crazy shit. Oh, hello, Bucky! Bucky's here. That's the most important part, so I'll probably start here in a minute. Just trying to open this fucking chapstick. It's very exciting updates. As always, let me know if sound or everything is off. Oh, Thor, now's not the time. Please, thank you. Jump down. Thor, please. Jump down. Thor, don't sit on my phone. God, I cannot open this chapstick. Here we go. Hi. Yeah, I wish I could take credit for it, but that's, the shelter had a Marvel theme for a lot of cats they had in. So, yeah, I have a cat named Thor, from the shelter, and then I have another cat, who I named Vincent. But Thor's a sweetheart. Yeah, they're wonderful names. Just so cute. I love my cats. Like the only reason I would ever have a camera on while I'm doing any sort of streaming is so you could see my cats. Jackson can be a good name, even if it's a X name, but I understand how X names suck. Noah's in here specifically to pet Thor.
I am. He's a baby.
He's a baby. Yeah, I just don't want to have to worry about how I'm looking in the camera all the time. I don't want to have to be like, is my hair too greasy? Do I have a big pimple on my nose? I don't know.
Will my roommate walk in their underwear?
Yeah, I mean, all valid things. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'd only do a face cam if I was doing if I was ever going to stream like a horror game or something, because something that you would need like reactions for. Not me reading. But anyway, it's been about 5 minutes, so I will go ahead and get started. We left off about to start on chapter 9. Get rid of notification. Okay, so chapter 9 is Tournament Day 4, Part 2. For the summary, we have the archery quarterfinals with Jondi, who you may remember is an OC named after one of my friends. So basically a friend self-insert. Tavros, John, Equius, Dami, who is another friend OC, Aridin, Kanaya, and Roxy. Unarmed quarterfinals are Jake, Karkat, Matuna, Dami, Nepeta, Jade, Roxy, and Kurlos. Ooh, yeah. Having to wear shirts and stuff can suck. I don't like to wear pants all the time, but that's usually an issue. I usually wear shirts, though. Like, I'm wearing a very awesome Mountain Dew shirt. It's not all that interesting. It's just Mountain Dew. But yeah, no, I get wearing shirts can suck. Cool. I swear it was here a minute ago. Dirk was making his way to his booth for the archery quarterfinals, basket of pastry still in hand, when he overheard a pair of vendors talking. He lingered nearby, careful to not seem like he was paying too close attention. "Did you lose another one?" a short man with close-cropped brown hair asked. Dirk thought he was a jeweler of some sort, if his mental checklist of artisans added up. He shook his head. "You know, I tease you, but I swear my stock of small gems has dwindled, and I can't find my favorite pliers either." The blonde woman he was talking to frowned. "You know, Damien, I think I heard..." But Dirk didn't stick around to see what else she had heard, as a bright yellow form in his peripheral was making a beeline toward him. Those were two more friend OCs. The blonde-haired was a vendor we already met, and then the other one was just another friend OC. Dirk slipped between a few stands, then looped around to the opposite side he would have come at the archery ring had he come at it head-on. He was rewarded with seeing his pursuer come through the crowds and find a seat a few minutes later, craning his neck to look around, and eventually giving up. Dirk grabbed another pastry from his basket and munched idly on it. He would have to keep an ear out for more things going missing. Two vendors misplacing their wares wasn't cause for alarm, but it lined up with his feeling something was off earlier today. After another moment of thought and a few more bites, he caught the eye of one of the servants making sure everything was set up and jerked his head to call him over. "Majesty?" "Grab two of the guards from the perimeter and add them to the patrols through the grounds, focusing on the artisans' booths." The servant bowed and dashed off to comply. If there really were things going missing, there were obvious culprits he had to consider, no matter how he hoped they had shown up for something more than just a bit of thievery. Karkat was relieved that neither Jondi nor Dave seemed especially worse for wear after their bouts. Jondi was stiff and stretched his arms and shoulders and wrists as he waited to be called up to his target. Dave's neck was clear of blood, the lot of it apparently having drained from a now crusted-over nick on his ear. The schedule for the matches had been hung up on a few posts around the area. Jondi was the first against Lord Egbert, and Karkat hated that he was fine with a noble winning, because at least it meant it was someone who was supposed to have been competing in the first place. He shouldn't be fine with that. He should want his fellow knight to win no matter what. Karkat looked to Dave, whose mouth was pressed into a thin line, and wondered if he was having a similar struggle. Maybe for different reasons. He shook his head. Dave wouldn't let a crush come before his comrades. Karkat knew Dave wanted Jondi to win just as much as he did. A trumpet call quieted the crowd, and an announcer climbed up to a podium and unrolled a scroll. "The archery quarterfinals will begin shortly. The paired competitors are as followed. Lord John Egbert versus Sir Jondi Carr. Kanaya Merriam versus Lady Dami Carmia. Prince Eridan Empora versus Sir Tavros Nitram. And Lord Equius Zahak versus Roxy Strider." The announcer paused for a moment, then said, "Will Lord John of House as Egbert of Skya and Sir Jondi Carr, Royal Knight of Skya, please step up to their marks?" Karkat patted Jondi on the shoulder, and Dave gave him a thumbs up. Jondi nodded to them both and approached the line. Lord Egbert shook Jondi's hand once he made it up, and they seemed to chat amicably for a few moments until the first trumpet blast to ready themselves. A few more moments were given than in the preliminaries. This time, they were aiming for the same target, and a little more thought was involved. Another few seconds, and the horn sounded again. Jondi loosed his arrow first, Lord Egbert's coming half a breath later. Jondi's hit the ring around the bullseye, and Egbert's was half an inch closer to the center. Egbert shot a second arrow immediately, then a third, one going to the second ring out, but the other hitting the edge of the bullseye. John Dee took a breath and released his second. It came in the second ring as well. Carquette frowned. The match basically lost unless he got a center bullseye, which he did not. His third arrow a little behind his first. To John Dee's credit, he didn't look defeated. He smiled and shook Lord Egbert's hand as the noble's victory was officially tallied and announced, and joined a small cluster of knights waiting for him on one side of the rows of benches. Carquette caught Dave's eye, then gestured to the group with his head. Dave shrugged, and the two joined the group. Carquette desperately trying not to think of his own second match coming up and the cheat he might be up against. Kanaya and the other Sky and Nobles matches went about as Dirk expected. Maybe if Lady Dami had been up against another noble, or even one of his knights, her skills with a bow would be considered impressive. But Kanaya was blindingly fast and accurate with her shots once again. They formed a ring around the bullseye, and though one of the nobles managed to break in the middle, the other two were solidly in the first ring. The two bowed to Dirk, and Kanaya rejoined Rose and the other Fae. It looked like they planned to leave, but Rose put a hand on Kanaya's arm, and instead she sat with the rest on the benches. Prince Aridin and the Prophet Knight, Nitram, were up next. Dirk couldn't help but smirk as he watched how the prince was obviously sulking from his previous loss. He scoffed at the nervous hand Sir Nitram held out to shake and readied himself. Nitram rearranged his chair again and loosed his arrow the second the signal went off, hitting on the edge of the bullseye. Aridin's hit a little closer in as he spared a moment to sneer at the knight, in which time said knight shot off another arrow that hit at exactly the right angle to knock Aridin's off. Aridin angrily pulled out his next arrow, and if he was trying to repeat the Prospicion's maneuver, he failed entirely as his second arrow hit the shaft of one of Nitram's and bounced uselessly to the ground. They both released their third, but there was little point. Nitram won with 2 arrows in the bullseye, a third in the first ring, and Aridin lost with only 1 on the target at all. Nitram looked kind of sheepish as his victory was announced, and he rolled to the benches where his fellow Prospicion knight was waiting for him. Dirk's eyes lingered just a little too long. Jake English looked up, caught his eye, and waved cheerily. Dirk looked away. At last was Roxy and Lord Equius, the latter with a retainer ready with spare arrows. Spare bows. I can't read. It's fine. At the signal, the two shot simultaneously, a loud crack coming from the noble's bow. Roxy hit dead center while Equius was 2 rings out. Roxy was half shocked, half laughing as Equius traded out for his second bow. She watched him shoot first, the string snapping this time. It hit the first ring, and Roxy fired and hit right next to it. She again waited for him to trade out his bow and shoot off his last arrow, striking about between his first and second. Roxy fired, and it stuck right next to his again, making her the winner. She clapped him on the arm, touching it a bit more than Dirk thought was strictly necessary, and said something that made the noble pull out a large handkerchief and dab his face profusely. She didn't spare him a glance when she walked off the field, which was for the best. Making archery exciting was very hard for me, and it just got harder the more archery I had to write. But Roxy flirting with Equius and making Equius sweat was very good. There was a bit of a gap between the end of this round of archery and the upcoming round of unarmed combat, but Dirk didn't want to be caught wandering around, so he grabbed his dwindling basket of pastries and made his way over, this time looping around the outskirts of the festival to avoid running into anyone. He thought he was doing a pretty good job of it, too, until someone grabbed his hand and jerked him behind a cluster of trees, out of sight of the festival entirely. Dirk grabbed for his dagger, but another large, strong hand grabbed his wrist to stop him, and a smooth, deep voice said, "Now hold on there. No need for that." That's as deep as this voice goes. Sorry. Dirk still didn't look up at the man towering over him. Had he always been so tall? Had he always been so strong? "Jake," he said. "Hal," Jake replied, smiling. "You've been avoiding me." Dirk shrugged him off, and Jake politely took half a step back. He was still so close, though. I've been busy. Jake laughed. I bet you have. Heir to the throne of Skya, huh? Who would have thought? What do you want? Jake looked hurt, but recovered quickly. I wanted to catch up. It's been years, Hal. Or should I call you Deirdre? Your Majesty, maybe? He winked, and Dirk couldn't repress a shiver at his intonation of the last. Jake's smile turned just a tad smug. You could have told me, you know. Dirk sighed and leaned against the tree, finally accepting that this was indeed a confrontation that was happening. I tried. The night before I left. Oh, Jake said. A look of realization crossed his face. Oh. Dirk covered his face with his hands and massaged his forehead. Yeah. I was stupid, they both said at once. Jake laughed and Dirk flushed. I'm sorry, Hal, Jake said, his smile tinged with sadness. I knew you weren't going to be in Prospect forever, so I thought we were on the same page about things. It wasn't until recently I started piecing it together. Yeah, Dirk said again. Jake leaned in, taking back the ground he had given before. Jake, Dirk said, a touch of warning in his voice. Hal, Jake replied. His hand cradled Dirk's face, one thumb brushing along his jaw. Let me make it up to you. Or tell me to stop. Just say the word, love. Dirk didn't make a sound. After they heard the archery bouts had ended, Dave and Karkat had headed over to the grandstand. Karkat nervous for his upcoming match. Dave was going to hang out in the waiting area with him until it was his time to go up, and Karkat was relieved. That is, until a certain noble with bright blue eyes and a shit-eating grin approached. A moment of your time, Sir Strider? He had asked, extending an arm. Dave looked at Karkat, his eyes wide and his mouth parted as he let out a strangled, sure, yeah, Karkat. Be right back. I'll be right back. Just chill out for a bit. Hang out, vibe out, do your thing. Lord Egbert, apparently growing impatient, had grabbed Dave by the elbow and led him off away from the grandstand and the vendors and out of sight. Karkat was now wandering around aimlessly, just away from the direction Dave and the noble went. He wasn't particularly in the mood to be around others while he waited, so he stayed to the edges, swerving between trees in his boredom. And then he heard something. Something muffled. Something that sounded like a cry of pain. Karkat cursed himself for not having a sword on him, but kept his hand ready to grab at the dagger in his boot. He approached the noise softly, slowly, then, another typo, leaned around a tree to see a half-dozen paces in front of him. He saw... Well... He walked away as quietly as he had come, practically holding his breath. A branch snapped under him and he paused, heart beating in his chest, but when nothing happened, he continued on. He made a beeline for the grandstand, deciding to wait outside of the entrance to the waiting area for Dave. Dave. Did he tell Dave? Did Dave need to know? Was there any practical reason to tell Dave that he saw his prince, his liege, his majesty, clutching to the considerable back of the overly friendly Prospician knight, who was, in turn, driving his tongue down his royal throat? Okay, well, maybe Karkat hadn't been able to see that, but it certainly looked like that was the case. He hoped his face cooled down before Dave came back. Karkat suddenly realized how much he did not want to tell anyone about this. Dirk heard what sounded like a branch breaking, and he froze, pushing Jake off of him just enough for him to concentrate. Jake cocked his head to listen as well, and after another minute or so of silence, he turned back to Dirk and said, It was nothing, love. Now, where were we? He dipped his head back to meet Dirk's lips, but the spell was broken. The prince straightened up and pushed Jake firmly, who obligingly took a few steps back. He looked concerned and confused. Hal? Dirk shook his head. Hal is gone. He wasn't real. This is me. And I'm over this. I've been over this. Over you. This was a serious lapse in judgment. The last seemed to be more aimed at himself than at Jake. The knight looked hurt nonetheless. Dirk sighed and ran his hand through his hair, trying to make it at least a little less obvious what he had been doing. I'm sorry. This wouldn't work out anyway. Not really. I can't remember what my Dirk voice is. Doesn't mean we couldn't have a little fun, Jake joked. But Dirk didn't smile. That's exactly what I mean. We're just not compatible. Jake looked deflated. Well, I suppose I'll leave you to it then. Sorry for... He gestured vaguely. Dirk snorted. I'm not going to pretend it was awful, Jake. The knight smiled. Probably for the best, anyway. Getting close to time for the brawl. Jake turned to leave, but Dirk grabbed his wrist. Actually, about your match, I have a favor to ask. And a tip. Jake quirked his eyebrow. Oh? Karkat huffed at Dave when he got back, ignoring his swollen lips and ruffled hair and wrinkled clothes. About time, he said. Yeah, sorry dude, but hey, it hasn't started yet, and that's what counts, right? Karkat had never seen anyone smile so sheepishly. He rolled his eyes. Whatever. Not like you even need to be in there with me. Hey, moral support is important, and I'm here to support all your testy morals. Karkat snorted. They entered the waiting area, and most of the other contestants were already there, some of them stretching in preparation for their matches. Fuck. Karkat should probably stretch too. He started doing reaches behind his back and glanced around the room. No schedule yet? He asked. He heard a little growl and jumped, then found its source. The wolfwoman, Harley, was furiously searching behind benches and under cloaks and grumbling, No schedule? No Greaves? Everything is missing! The others in the room were subtly shifting out of her way when she chose to search their area next. Said there was a last-minute change, Roxy Strider said, shrugging. It seemed odd to Karkat, but everything seemed odd to Karkat, and he could recognize he was growing a little too paranoid. He shrugged as well and went back to stretching, adding in lunges and twists. After a few more minutes, the announcer poked his head into the room. Everyone here? He asked, rhetorically as he began counting up the participants. He frowned at Dave. You're not in this event, he said. Nope. For a moment, Karkat thought Dave was going to be kicked out, but the man continued counting, then referenced his sheet, then counted again, and said, Has anyone seen Jake English, of Prospect? Right on cue, the large man in yellow burst into the room. He was slightly out of breath as he said, Sorry, am I late? Karkat wasn't looking at him. Karkat wasn't looking at him so hard he felt as though his eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets so they could make sure to never look at him again. If Dave noticed, he didn't say anything. The announcer pursed his lips. Alarmingly punctual, he said. You're up first, sir. He then affixed the schedule he was holding to the wall, then went to announce the start of the competition. Jake English versus Matuna Captor. Nepeta Lejean versus Jade Harley. Roxy Lalonde versus Dami Karmia. Karkat Vantis versus Kurlos Makara. Karkat was up last, and against the Prince of Prospect, the man who had, so far, taken his opponents down in less than a handful of well-aimed, forceful blows. He eyed the prince warily without thinking, and the prince just smiled back. Sir English sought out Lord Captor and shook his hand firmly. I look forward to our battle, my lord. May the best man be the victor. Captor sneered. I'm sure I will be. English laughed. The confidence. We'll see, my friend. We'll see. The trumpet sounded, and the announcer gestured for the pair to make their way out. They stood on opposite ends, Captor standing casually, arms loose at his sides. English posed in a crouch, arms out like he was about to tackle a bear. The announcer moved to his ledge, and the horn went off again. English lunged at Captor, who dodged lazily to the right and smirked, then froze as the knight easily switched directions and tackled him to the ground. Karkat felt nearly as shocked as Captor looked. Sure, he was in to watch the man embarrass another knight, despite the prince's reassurance that he'd take care of it. Whatever that meant. The noble managed to squirm his way out from under English and jump back a few paces, suddenly looking more and more distressed as the knight stood up, hunched over again, and ready to lunge. The two circled each other, staring each other down, and the more upset, if not angry, Lord Captor looked, the wider Sir English grinned. Karkat was watching through the slits as they moved around the stadium. English was now opposite him, but moving inward, and Karkat, who had still been a bit too embarrassed to look at the man too closely, spared a glance to his face, and for a split second caught a glimpse of pale yellow coming from his eyes. And it hit him. They were both fucking cheating. Notes. 20k. 20 fucking k. Who would have thought? Certainly not me when I started this. Thanks for all your support so far. I am just going to keep riding this unexpected wave of inspiration and productivity. And I still am. Now over double that amount. I love that part with Jake and Dirk. Like, I started getting excited when I realized where the fic was going, like, when I was reading it just now. Jake good, actually. Okie dokie. Chapter 10. Tournament Day 4, Part 3. Yeah, Jake good, actually. Love Jake. Also, oh, thank you. I had no idea how to do his voice, so I have so many characters in this. Do you know I have so many characters in this, and I have to give them all different voices and then remember what they were after I do that? Yeah. So that's a thing, but, Jake good, actually. And I headcanon Jake as, aromantic. So, he's aromantic in this fic. Which is why he and Dirk didn't work out. Griffin can actually keep his fucking character voices straight. Like, I cannot do that. Arrow Jake, very good. I love Arrow Jake. But yeah. Chapter 10, Tournament Day 4, Part 3, Unarmed Combat Quarterfinals, Matuna Captor versus Jake English, because this was a long fight. Because I'm in the quarterfinals, and I did this to myself. This is probably the most exciting fight, or, like, maybe the second most exciting fight. Well, it's definitely in the top 5 most exciting fights, and it is in the fucking quarterfinals. Ridiculous. I did silly things. You don't want to know why Matuna is in this and the way this happened at all? I'm going to tell you why, because that's a rhetorical question. I just had this idea of Matuna, like, I'm like, how would Matuna be in a fight? Like, because I had to sit down and think of what fights they would want to do. And everyone else has 2 events, but Matuna only had 1, because he wanted to do unarmed combat, because if he uses his powers, that's not a weapon technically. And that's how this all came about. Was because I thought it would be fucking hilarious if Matuna tried to, like, be like, well, technically I didn't, like, use a weapon, so it's not cheating, is it? And I thought that would be funny. Anyway. On we go. Chapter 10, Tournament Day 4, blah, 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 blah. Dave had become quite attuned to when a Karkat tantrum was starting, and as such, as soon as Karkat's shoulders tensed and hands balled into fists, Dave was next to him, a reassuring hand on his back. "What's up, Cat?" Karkat glanced at the people around him, but none seemed particularly interested in their conversation. Still, he kept his voice low as he asked, "You remember when I talked to you-know-who yesterday about you-know-what?" Dave took a second to process, then his hand tensed on Karkat's back. "I don't like where this is headed, dude." "English is doing it too." "What?" Karkat grabbed the back of Dave's head and pushed it down until it was at the same level of his own and angled it. "Watch. Don't blink." English was looking smug and practically sauntered over to where Captor was hunched, teeth bared. The noble lunged at him, but for a split second, right before he dodged out of the way, there was a flicker of pale yellow again. Nah, you're good, Bucky. We can always, chat on Discord, too. Let's chill. You don't gotta respond to fucking everything. I'm just talking. You work. Yeah, there was a flicker of pale yellow again. Karkat looked to Dave for validation, but his friend only frowned. Could have been a trick of the light, like a reflection off his stupid fucking outfit. He didn't sound like he was convinced, though. Karkat looked back to the match, and Lord Captor was now nursing his cheek as he circled English. He lunged forward again, and again another glimpse of pale yellow as English caught him in the belly with his fist. Dave said. Captor staggered back. Where in the last match he seemed to be in tune with his opponent, if not one step ahead, he now seemed to be one step behind. Every blow seemed to catch him by surprise. English rushed toward him, and Captor's face scrunched up in anger, and a burst of murky green leaked out from under his goggles. But another shimmer of yellow light responded from English's eyes as he grabbed Captor in a bear hug and slammed him to the ground. Karkat looked at Dave and raised his eyebrows forcefully. Fine, okay, you're right, Dave relented. So what should we do? Man, nothing. It still looks like a normal match to the audience, and the dude doesn't seem to be cheating as much as he is preventing Lord Captor from doing it. Karkat grumbled wordlessly. Look, nothing will come from calling this out, alright? Let's just see how it plays out. Karkat frowned, but didn't argue further. Captor had managed to wiggle his way out from under English again. The pulses of light were now escaping his goggles every minute or so, and English's eyes softly mirrored the pattern. English threw another punch at Captor, who barely leapt out of the way in time. English's fist collided with the wall behind the noble, and there was a flash of green, then a board popped out of place and flew toward English's face. The knight sidestepped it easily, and his next punch connected with Captor's jaw. Captor was snarling. High up in the stands, a member of the audience tripped as she was heading back to her seat. The helmet she had in her hand flew out and down the crowd. Someone noticed and tried to catch it, but instead accidentally slammed it down harder, straight to English. The knight dodged it again and shook his head at Captor, muddy green light now pouring out from behind his goggles while English's eyes still flashed intermittently. Captor sprinted to English and swept his leg up, connecting with the knight's side. The knight staggered a bit, but grabbed Captor's leg and slammed him to the ground. Captor bounced up quickly and dashed up and kicked again, this time managing to jump back before English could grab him. English was able to dodge a few of them, but Captor was relentless. The change in tactics was strange to Karkat. Had the noble given up on his powers? No, he still looked like he was concentrating very hard on something. His attacks also seemed to only come from specific angles. Was he leading English somewhere? Captor was breathing heavily, now a few paces away from English, who was poised and waiting. The noble then ran toward English and jumped and kicked, his feet hitting the knight square in the middle, and he staggered back until he hit the wall while the noble fell hard, failing to catch himself after his kick. Then there was a groan and a crack, and Karkat realized where English had been led. The announcer's ledge above him was breaking and falling, and time stopped. Dirk took the extra seconds to get his heart rate under control. He looked to the door of the waiting area and saw a Strider standing in the doorway. The knight gestured impatiently to the mess happening before him, and then went back inside the room. Dirk leapt down from his booth, rolling as he hit the ground, and got to work. He grabbed the announcer from his post and hauled him to the far side of the stadium. He did the same with Jake, with considerable more difficulty. The man was dense. As for the cheating lord, he dragged Captor a few feet away from the impact site and stood with one foot on his chest. Dirk waited for his breathing to get under control, straightened out his clothes and hair a bit, wiped away some sweat, then nodded to the waiting area. He looked down at Captor and repressed a shiver as time started again. Prince Diedrich was there in the middle of it all. English and the announcer was safe to one side of the ring, while the noble was literally under the prince's heel as the stand crashed a few feet away. Gasps and murmurs and even a few screams rippled through the crowd. What the fuck? He's an aspect user too? What the fuck was that? Karkat was practically yelling, but he looked to Dave, who had his eyes screwed shut and was pinching the bridge of his nose, and shrugged. Oh right, Dave didn't like this aspect bullshit any more than he did. Prince Deirdric was looking down at the noble beneath him, his face impassive. "You're a cheat, Lord Captor." Captor spit. "I was unarmed, wasn't I?" "You could have killed someone." "Good thing you stepped in, then," the noble sneered. Prince Deirdric looked at the crowd. "Lord Matuna of House Captor has forfeited his match for using his aspect against his opponent and risking the lives of non-participants. So Jake English of Prospect advances to the semifinals." Semifinals. The prince removed his foot from the noble and made his way out and around, back up to his booth. English bowed to the crowd, then attempted to help Captor up, but the noble smacked his hand away and scrambled up on his own. The announcer, seemingly finally regaining composure after the sudden turn of events, said, "There will be a brief respite as we quickly fix any damages that could further hinder your safety or the next match. Thank you for your patience." Then scrambled off to find any workers to help with that. Karkat was steaming. "English was doing it too. Why does he get a pass? Just because His Majesty..." He stopped himself. Dave laid a hand on his arm. "Not worth it, dude. Besides, do you think that English guy was cheating in his other match?" Karkat begrudgingly shook his head. "Then as long as he doesn't cheat in his next, I think it's fine." Karkat knew that sounded rational, but he also knew about the prince's bias toward that particular night. What if this wouldn't be the last time His Majesty ruled in favor of the prohibition? And why did he think the best solution to solve cheating was with more cheating? Karkat wanted to go confront him again, but Dave was right. Best to leave it be for now. Plus, the instant anger that let him leave his senses long enough to ambush royalty was not currently coursing through his veins, and, though he wouldn't admit it, he was mortified he had done it at all. "Well, that was quite an opening act," said a squeaky voice. Karkat turned and saw it was one of the masked women who had spoken. The not other Strider. The not other Strider. "Afraid you can't top it?" the Wolfey asked, grinning. "I'm afraid I might trounce you too quickly, if that's what you mean," the masked woman, Lejean, replied, mirroring her grin. The pair burst into laughter and began chatting amicably, with the occasional taunt thrown in for good measure. Karkat slumped onto a bench and hoped the repairs would be over soon. That was a fun match to write. I really like writing this version of Jake. He's very fun. Yeah, I don't know. That was just a really fun chapter to write. I was very excited for it to go up. And it's still exciting reading it. And this is still more unarmed quarterfinals because fucking this took forever. To be fair, it's a lot of matches, but yeah. Chapter 11, Tournament Day 4, Part 4. Unarmed quarterfinals. Jade Harley versus Nepeta Lejean. Dami Carmia versus Roxy Leland. Karkat Vantas versus Carlos Makara. Dirk was thankful the repairs were over quickly enough. Sure, the announcer didn't get his ledge rebuilt, but that could wait until after the quarterfinals were done, and something told Dirk the man wasn't all too eager to be up on it again anyway. But the next match was starting, and that meant Dirk had to stop berating himself endlessly for how the first match went and instead focus his attention on something else. Lejean and Harley were walking out into the field, laughing with each other, then separated to their opposite sides, poised on the balls of their feet. The trumpet went off, and they sprung at each other in unison, but Harley was practically jumping with each step and quickly crossed the halfway point and to Lejean and tackled her to the ground. She held her down while Lejean kicked up with her feet until one found purchase under Harley's ribs and shoved her off, only to pounce on her instead. Lejean was trying to twist Harley onto her back to pin her down, but Harley got one knee underneath her and shoved up and back and launched them both back, slamming Lejean down while Harley landed on top of her. They both lay there for a moment, winded, but Harley recovered first and flipped over and wrestled Lejean's arms behind her back and tried to sit on her legs, but the masked woman ripped one free and slammed it into Harley so hard she rolled a few paces and struggled to get up. Lejean didn't wait until she was steady and attacked as soon as she was up, grabbing Harley at her middle and tried to slam her into the ground again, but Harley kneed up sharply until Lejean let go, almost collapsing to the ground herself. The Fae sidestepped to move behind Lejean, then grabbed around her middle and throat and seemed to be trying to push her to the ground. Lejean clawed at Harley's arm and managed to get enough leverage to bite down hard on her forearm. Harley yelped and jumped back. Dirk stood up, ready to intercede, when Harley let out a growl and jumped back at the masked woman and dug her teeth into her shoulder. The match turned chaotic after that. Bite and scratch marks dotted any exposed skin, and any piece of cloth that poked out of their armor was shredded. They were bloody and panting, and more than once Dirk almost called it off, but the look on their faces stopped him. They were feral, and they were intense, and they were gleeful, and Dirk honestly wondered if he could separate them without Strider's assistance, either one of them. So he didn't try, even as the announcer looked at him more and more frantically. Finally, they dashed against each other one last time, both tumbling to the ground, rolling and clawing and grabbing, and then they stopped. And Dirk waited, the anticipation of the crowd practically palpable. And Harley rose on unsteady feet and looked over the masked woman, who groaned but did not get up. The Fae raised one fist in the air as she was declared the winner, and then she fell back to the ground, and the physician and a few assistants rushed to take them off the field. This is the last time you will see more than one assistant, I think. I forget I said there were more. Next up were Roxy and Lady Carmia, one of three of his nobles left in any of the events. He did not expect this match to go well for her. A small bell above Dirk rang, signaling someone at the foot of the stairs requested his presence. He tugged on a cord to ring the bell next to them to give them consent to ascend. A servant appeared and bowed deeply while holding out a scroll. "A report from the guards," she said. Dirk took the scroll and dismissed the servant before unrolling it. He frowned at the contents. Half a dozen vendors reported missing items, several more missing money, but the guards have not noticed anyone especially suspicious who had not already been verified by His Majesty in attendance at the tournament. It lacked in subtlety, but the point was made. Dirk needed to talk to Roxy. He looked back in time to watch Roxy dropkick the noble, who swung a fist back as Roxy got on top of her, then twist that arm behind her back and flip her around until she had Carmia on her stomach, one arm bent back and one of Roxy's knees digging into her spine. Well, that didn't take long. 4 of his own subjects left of 13 competitors. He tried to not let it bother him. Vantas was the only one who really mattered, but it irked him to see last-minute entrants, most without his knowledge, much less permission, put his knights and nobles to shame. But as long as Vantas won this next match. Hands clapped on Karkat's shoulders and he jumped, then glared at the culprit. "Chill," Dave said. "You got this, dude." Karkat was still frowning, but he appreciated the words. He took a deep breath and walked out with the Prince of Prospect. They took their positions at opposite sides of the stadium, the prince smiling, arms hanging loose at his sides, and Karkat with his legs braced for impact. They were announced and the horns sounded, and Karkat lunged forward. He feinted to the left, then swung with his right, aiming for Kurlos' side, but Kurlos dodged out of the way and swung back. Karkat ducked and felt the rush of air as the punch went over his head, but he didn't stop to think. He launched forward from his crouched position and slammed head and shoulders into the prince's middle, driving him back a few steps. Karkat locked one arm around Kurlos and punched his side repeatedly with the other, as he pushed him back further and further. If he could get Kurlos pinned to the wall, maybe... The Prospician recovered from his shock and slammed a fist into Karkat's spine. The knight's arm released, and he dropped to his knees, his breath knocked out of him. The next fist was coming. He knew that somewhere deep in his oxygen-deprived, pain-filled brain. He had seen it a handful of times now. 1, 2, and you were down. His brain whirled, trying to connect what he needed to do with action. Which way would the first come from? Which fist had just hit him? Didn't matter. He needed to move. The signals finally fire to his limbs, and he pushed, rolling to the right, the prince's next blow barely grazing his side. It had been an elbow. Fuck. Get up. Karkat scrambled backward, or sideways, or something, until he hit the wall. He had driven Kurlos closer to it than he had realized. He used the leverage to stand on his legs, which were slowly feeling sturdier beneath him. Faster. He needed to recover faster. It took 2 strides to the Prospition's prince's long legs to get him over to where Karkat was leaning, panting and still in pain. He looked perturbed. Karkat took inventory of his limbs. What worked? What could be made to work? What did he need to save? Fuck it. Dave always told him he had a thick skull. He leveraged his heels against the wall and pushed himself off, headbutting the prince in the gut. He locked both arms around his middle this time and pulled him to the ground. Kurlos may be taller, but Karkat was bigger. They collapsed to the ground with a thud, and Karkat quickly pinned the prince's arms to the ground by his elbows, leaning all his weight onto them. For a split second, they looked to be in a stalemate, Karkat using his whole body to make sure Kurlos couldn't move. The second he released anything to make a move, the prince would be on top of him. But Karkat didn't take that split second to think that. Karkat used his thick skull for other purposes. He slammed his forehead into Prince Kurlos' face, and his stomach turned as he felt his nose crunch beneath it. Dizzy and aching, he couldn't keep upright, so he let himself roll off of the prince and waited with bated breath for him to get up and deal the finishing blow. 1, 2, 3 seconds passed, and nothing came. Karkat looked his head to the side. Wow, I need to redo that. Karkat turned his head to the side to look at the prince, and he wasn't moving except for the unsteady rise and fall of his chest. Karkat used the last of his strength to throw his fist in the air in triumph. Then, just as his victory was being declared, he blacked out. This was also a very intense fight, and one of the most intense of the of everything. Again, I used it up in the quarterfinals, so that's fun. Nah, it's good. It was a fun fight though, and it definitely set up shit for later. Surprisingly, half this shit that's happened has been a surprise. Like, even when I plan stuff out in advance, it just happens in surprising ways. Because that's how writing is. And there are so many typos in this, but you guys get my shitty first drafts of everything. I think I'll do this next one. Oh god. See, the problem is I want to say I'll do this next one and stop. But after this next one is chapter 13, which I think I called Midnight Ministrations. And it's very, very good. And so I think I'll do these next two. Because the last chapter of this chapter and the next chapter all just go together so well. Kind of the chapter after that. Like, a lot of these go together a lot. But especially, like, these couple of chapters. Because it all kind of deals heavily with Karkat. So I think I'll do this chapter and then the next chapter. And then I'll be done for today. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. The next chapter is very interesting. And it was a surprise to write. Chapter 12. Tournament Day 4, Part 5. Archery Semifinals. John Egbert, Tavros Nitram, Kanaya Merriam, and Roxy Strider. The physician looked nervously at the pair of advisors who were decidedly not looking at anything, least of all the prince and his cousin standing across from them in the cramped room. "When will they recover?" the prince asked. The physician's head jerked back to the prince, then down and to the side to avoid eye contact. "Full recovery could take weeks, Highness. When will they be well enough to fight?" "Fight? The Fae girl, maybe soon as her injuries were less severe, but I'm not as familiar with her anatomy." She glanced at the seer, who simply smiled. "But Cervantes did substantial damage to himself after he was hit in the spine. Pushed past limits he shouldn't have. I have no..." "When?" The amount the physician was sweating would put Lord Equius to shame. "If possible, not until his full recovery. Weeks." weeks. The prince was now muttering to himself, frowning deeply. Is he awake? Can he stand? I wouldn't advise. Can he stand? Cousin? The seer placed a hand on his arm, but he shrugged it off and stared at the physician. She looked between the seer and the prince, uncertain of her best move. Yes, but... Good. Good. Prince Dietrich turned his attention to his advisors. The combat semifinals will be pushed to tomorrow, and the finals will be pushed to the day after. This will leave only one day for the celebration, but we'll make it work. Make the announcement. That took so much to figure out what I was going to have Dirk do here. Just so you know, that one fucking line. I couldn't tell if he was going to make Karkat try to compete today or push it off. But yeah, that's what happened. Your Highness, surely it would be better to... One of the advisors began. The prince simply stared at him, and he shut his mouth with a clack. Yes, sire, the other said. The pair bowed and let themselves out. Tend to your patients and tell them of the change, the prince said, turning back to the physician. I will let them know the option is available, but... She paused and dabbed her face and attempted to look resolute. I will advise them against participating tomorrow, especially for the night. This is just a tournament, Highness. Prince Dietrich nodded. Do as you must. He then nodded to the seer, and the pair left the small office. The archery semifinals were already being set up, so the prince started to head there, but his cousin grabbed his wrist and tugged him to the far side of the grandstand that was facing away from the festivities. Dirk, what are you doing? She asked, exasperated. I'm making sure the tournament can... You know that's not what this is about. Or are you really risking one of your most talented knights on a vanity contest? Dirk was silent for a moment. I need him, Rose. It has to be him. Why? Dirk didn't answer. Rose rubbed her temples. You're an idiot, she said. Then she sighed. Look, I don't know if this will work. I'm barely sure it will work for Jade, but at least she is connected to the forest. But if you're going to insist on going this route, I think Feferi can help. Dave had been staring Karkat down since shortly after he woke up. In the first few seconds, he had a look of immense relief, but now it was frozen into a poker face, removed of emotion, though Karkat could feel waves of disappointment rolling off of him. What the fuck was I supposed to do, Dave? He asked for the dozenth time. I guess I could have just thrown in the towel and fucking lost like I had planned, he grumbled. Dave let out a hum of approval. Oh, fuck off! You're the one who told me not to. I said you wouldn't, Dave countered, the first words he had spoken in half an hour. And apparently I was right, even at the risk of... He gestured to one of the physician's assistants who was tending to Harley. Permanent paralysis and brain damage at worst, she filled in. Dave looked to Karkat pointedly. Karkat huffed. I'm fine, though. That's what counts. Harley snorted and Karkat shot a glare in her direction. Dave frowned and didn't say anything. Karkat was about to start up the argument again, because at least then Dave would fucking talk to him, but he was preemptively interrupted by the physician coming into the room, forehead damp with sweat and quickly straightening out a nervous look from her face. Ahem, she began, as if the whole room wasn't already looking at her. There is something His Majesty has instructed me to inform you of, but first there is something you, Cervantes, and you, Harley, must keep in mind. This tournament has no stakes beyond a bit of gold and an ego boost. Cervantes, you will still be a knight of high respect once this is all done. I'm sure it will be mostly forgotten about in but a few months. The injuries you both have sustained are significant, though admittedly Harley's to a lesser degree. Please keep all this in mind for what I must tell you next. She paused and looked between her patients, as though trying to force the message into their skulls with her eyes. Please get on with it, Karkat groaned, hoping his spike of anxiety wasn't apparent in his voice. The physician looked at him evenly. I have been told to inform you both, and I suppose you as well, Sir Strider, as this does affect you, that the semifinals have been moved to tomorrow, and the finals the day after, in order to give Cervantes and Harley extra time to recover if they still wished, against my recommendation, to participate in the tournament. Harley let out a bark of a laugh. Like that was ever a question. I fought after worse than this plenty of times. The assistant attending Harley pressed down slightly on the shoulder she was bandaging, and the Fae yelped, then looked very sheepish, her wolf ears tilting down and back. Maybe a night's rest wouldn't hurt, she admitted. This jade voice is nothing like my usual jade voice, but we'll go with it. Well, there's no way Karkat's going to. I mean, Dave began. Then he looked at his friend, who was chewing his lip thoughtfully. Karkat, what the fuck? I'm just thinking about it. I mean, you're the one who said I should try to win this thing. I cannot stress enough that, again, I did not say that, but if I did, that was barring you almost giving yourself a brain injury, you dense piece of shit. Karkat was not sure he had ever heard Dave yell. It wasn't the unrestrained volume of his own yell, but it was loud and it was intense, and it hit his lungs more than his ears, and he didn't particularly want to have that directed at him again. But that didn't stop him from growling back. I can fucking take care of myself, Dave. Ooh, that hit my throat weird. The physician sighed loudly. Please, she said very tiredly, please just wait and decide tomorrow. Sometimes it can take time to see the full extent of your injuries. Okie dokie, Harley said. Fine, Karkat grumbled, not looking at Dave. They could wait to argue more about this in the morning. Dirk didn't see Strider in the crowd, but he supposed that was to be expected. He saw Rose sitting with the fairy, both looking a mix worried and agitated. Rose muttered something to the water fae, and she shot a dirty look at him. Nothing new. Lord Egbert and Sir Nitram were up first, Egbert trying to keep conversation with the knight while also scanning the crowd. He apparently couldn't find who he was looking for, because he soon engaged fully, then jumped a bit and laughed as the first trumpet sounded. The two readied themselves. Their arrows flew as soon as they had heard the second blast. Egbert's hit the very edge of the bullseye, while Nitram's was a bit farther into the first ring. The noble's second hit right next to his. Nitram's came seconds after, hitting into the side of Egbert's second arrow. Egbert's tilted away from the impact, but held in place. The knight slouched a bit in his chair for just a second, then loosed his last arrow, and Egbert did the same. Both flirted in the edges of the bullseye, but with Nitram's farther out first shot, Egbert was the winner. He looked through the crowd again, this time only for a few seconds, before he headed off and away from the event. Nitram rolled up to Jake, who clapped him on the shoulder and walked off with him toward the line of food booths. Dirk ignored his suddenly grumbling belly. There was a second match to watch. Kanaya and Roxy were next. Roxy chatted up the winged fae, but Kanaya didn't seem to be quite as engaged in conversation, instead counting her arrows and looking perturbed. The first horn sounded, and she shook her head and readied herself, as did Roxy. Then the second blast came, and they both still stood there, Kanaya's hand hovering at her quiver and Roxy's on her bow, not yet stretched taut. Another few breaths, and Kanaya grabbed an arrow and shot, Roxy right after. They both hit within the bullseye. Another breath, and Kanaya let her next two shots fly, one on each side of Roxy's first. Roxy stared at the target for a few moments, then breathed in, and the second arrow hit the edge of the cluster, a little farther out than the middle of the bullseye. Another pause, and she aimed and fired and hit dead center. An attendant went up to measure the shots and added up the points, then turned and raised his left arm, signaling Roxy had won. The masked woman sighed heavily and bent forward, as though the tension had been keeping her standing up. She straightened and held out her hand to Kanaya, who grabbed it and held it firmly. Roxy laughed and tugged her forward into her hug, careful around her wings. Kanaya patted her on the back, then gestured over to where Rose and Feferi were sitting when Roxy released her, but Roxy shook her head and walked off to where the masked man, Infacador, was sitting waiting for her. And that was it. The day was cut short, though the merchants would keep their stands open as planned. Dirk just had to hope that whatever it was Feferi was going to do would be enough, or else the past several months were for nothing. but there was nothing he could do about it now. The stakes were much lower, but he was almost just as restless as he was all those years ago in Durst. He almost regretted burning the bridge of his old stress relief. He shook his head. No, this was for the best. He wasn't 20 anymore, but he knew how easily he'd fall back into old habits. Instead, he would focus his energy on a backup plan. There had to be another way, right? Dirk ignored his gnawing stomach and headed back to the castle. And a break from terrible chapter titling, we have Chapter 13, Midnight Ministrations. Let me check my phone notifications real quick. Yeah. Okay. Chapter 13, Midnight Ministrations. Summary. Karkat is healed. It was pitch black when Karkat was woken up by the sound of movement in the tent he and Harley had been moved to for the night. The physician hadn't wanted to move him all the way back to the barracks just to come back here tomorrow, and Harley figured it was best to stay too, so they were still on the grounds of the tournament, the physician's assistant sleeping nearby. Dave wasn't here, though it took some convincing of their captain to get him to go. Karkat ended up having to promise not to make a decision until he got back. Like that would change Karkat's mind. There was another sound. Like someone had bumped into one of the tables, followed by a soft "How?" And Karkat was suddenly on high alert. He had thought before it was just the assistant moving about, but she had been familiar enough with the tent to not run into things, and that "ow" didn't sound like her anyway. Karkat reached down to where his dagger normally was, and cursed inwardly as he groped at nothing, and remembered it had been set aside, maybe on the table the intruder just bumped into. He moved to roll out of the cot and into a crouch, but in his focus on the potential danger, he forgot about the reason he was there in the first place. He twisted and cried out as pain shot up his back and into his neck and fell back where he lay. There was a sudden glow and a twist of some sort in the space around him, and even though his surroundings looked the same, Karkat was somehow certain he was not in the same place he was before. The glow stayed, a bright white ball several feet off the ground, and as it approached, Karkat realized it was a face. The glow dimmed as another joined it, pink and pulsing like a heartbeat. It was the other two Fae. Karkat's conclusion was confirmed as the one glowing pink brought out some sort of spherical object and tapped it until it lit up the room with what seemed to be hundreds or thousands of constellations. Or it seemed to light up the room. Karkat could only see a few feet in any direction, enough distance to see Harley in the cot next to him and the two Fae in front of him, but anything beyond was so black it felt like it wasn't there at all. "What do you want?" he asked gruffly. "You're Vantus, right?" Miriam asked back. Karkat nodded. "Lie still. We're here to help." "What the fuck does that mean?" In response, Pyxis moved toward him, and Karkat instinctively jerked back, another cry of pain leaving his lips as his body throbbed at the movement. But as soon as the water Fae put her hands on him, the pain reduced to a dull ache. Karkat's stomach dropped. "What did you do?" he hissed. Pyxis frowned. "A thank you would have been nice." "What did you do?" he asked again, more forcefully. "I'm a healer. I'm here to help you heal so you don't kill yourself in tomorrow's matches." She still sounded bubbly, but there was an undercurrent of bite in her tone. "I don't need an aspect advantage to win." Karkat was caught between anger and panic. Her hand was still on him, and though his pain was lessened, he could feel it spike back when he tried moving too much, followed by another wave dampening it. It was unsettling, to say the least. "That's not what this is, Vantus." Now Miriam's hand was on him, but he didn't feel the same pulse of energy coming from her. It soothed him somewhat. "Feferi, darling, wake Jade up. Maybe a demonstration will help." Feferi did as she was asked, and Karkat almost sighed in relief as the aspect stopped flowing through him, even if any new jolt of pain stayed sharp and nagging. Feferi bent down and kissed Jade's forehead, murmuring something to her, and her ears twitched as she stretched and sat up with Feferi's assistance. She smiled sheepishly at her fellow Fae, then started when she noticed Karkat. "Him too?" she asked. "Special request," Fairy said, sighing. Jade looked like she wanted to say something else, but stopped herself. Let's get started, shall we? The sooner Jade can pick up some of the weight of this place, the better, Miriam said. Pixis nodded, then took Jade's face in her hands and closed her eyes. Pink and green and white auras began pulsing from her hands, and Karkat stared. He looked between her eyes and her hands, but while there was a little bit of green coming from beneath her eyelids, it wasn't as much as there should be. How? Hush, Miriam interrupted. She moved her hand to his own and squeezed it lightly. Karkat shut his mouth and watched as bite and scratch marks closed and bruises lightened. Harley sighed in contentment and leaned into the Waterfay's hands. Soon, the glowing stopped, and Feferi removed her hands and gave room for Harley to stretch. Harley slid off the cot and did just that, her wolf ears perked up and tail wagging lightly. She was covered in pink scars and light yellow bruises, and she groaned as she cracked her back. Good as new, she said happily. Miriam smiled. Do try not to get quite so feral next time, love. You worry us sick. Harley wrinkled her nose. I'm fine, Can't a girl have a little fun? A little, Miriam conceded, smirking. Jade bounced over to Miriam and wrapped her arms around her and kissed her cheek, then slung out an arm and pulled Feferi in and kissed her as well. Miriam let go of Karkat's hand and hugged back. After a few moments of nuzzles and giggles, Karkat cleared his throat. The three let go of each other and looked at him. Sorry, what's your name? Would you like a kiss too? Harley asked. Karkat Fantas and no, but if you three are done, maybe leave so I can go back to sleep, or alternatively, wake up from this weird as fuck dream. Miriam patted his hand and said, You're right, we have been neglecting you. Do you feel better about what's to come? Karkat frowned. Doesn't matter. It's sounding like I don't have a choice in this. Your choice is this, sweet, Feferi said, smiling with those sharp rows of teeth. You can refuse my healing and forfeit the match tomorrow, but the look you just gave me tells me that's not an option. Karkat tried to smooth out his face as the face smirked at him. Or you can refuse my healing and fight in your matches, and either lose spectacularly seconds in, or injure yourself so badly you can no longer stay a night. You know, like you almost did today. She smiled brightly again. Or you can suck up whatever issues you have with aspects or whatever it is you call my magic, and let me heal you as best I can, and maybe not make a fool of yourself or die tomorrow. What will it be? Karkat mulled this over for a few moments. What's the catch? Catch? The Waterfay asked, her smile almost dangerous. She leaned in, her face inches from his own. Do you think I'm trying to trick you, little one? Do you think I'm going to take your name, or your voice, or your beating heart? With the last, she jabbed a finger into his chest, and he let out a yelp. Feferi just laughed. Miriam put a hand on Feferi's shoulder. The favor is not for you, Karkat, so you owe us nothing. The only catch, if you wish to call it that, is Feferi has not healed someone from outside the forest. At least, she said thoughtfully, not someone who wasn't more in tune with it, or us, or at the very least their aspect. There may be complications. We simply don't know. Karkat chewed his lip. Then he sighed. Do it. Feferi smiled sharply again. Close your eyes. Why? Karkat asked suspiciously. Miriam grabbed his hand again, softly squeezing with one and patting it with the other. Do as she says, Karkat. He relaxed and closed his eyes. Feferi put her hands on either side of his face and lightly placed her thumbs on his eyelids. It felt like liquid was pouring through them, like Feferi was using him as a sift in the river as cool trickles of energy flowed from her into him. He wanted to shudder, but the weight of her presence held him down and still. The water, the energy, whatever, was cold, too cold. The type of cold that hurt and numbed and ached with every breath. A groan built up deep in his chest, but he couldn't tell if it was audible because of the rushing blood that filled his ears. He squeezed his eyes, and he could see it, his blood, that pulsing ooze within himself. It shimmered with the aura Feferi was giving off earlier, but it only made it look diseased. He watched, unable to do anything else, as it lapped at his fractured bones and under his bruises and scrapes. He couldn't tell if the water was still ice cold or boiling hot, but it burned him with each pulse. He screamed. He was pretty sure he screamed because blood filled his throat to fix the rawness from how loud it must have been. He thought he felt another hand on his chest, pressing down, and he wanted to flinch away, but the pressure calmed him somehow. He could feel the pulse from the other person's, slow and steady, and his heart ached to match its rhythm. So it slowed. And his breathing slowed. And he started to feel very far away. And the blood stopped looking so much like his own. He sat on the shores of that shimmering, bloody current surging through him and felt at home. And that's where we're going to leave it off. That last chapter was fun to write. It was fun to read. It was fun. It's a fun chapter. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it here. It's been a bit over an hour. I think that's a good amount of time. For shit. So yeah, thank you guys for joining me. Thank you, Bucky. You are great. We can talk about this later. I'm glad it was fun to hang. I hope work's going all right. I'll post this on YouTube later, as usual. My YouTube is Live Laugh Stuck. It's linked on my Twitter. And yeah, I will see you guys later. I say way too early because I still have to end the stream. Bye!